Hello, wonderful listeners of Sci-Fi Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to sustain their lives and continue creating these adventures for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description or pinned comment. The sky above Earth did not darken with an approaching armada. Instead, it shattered. Reality itself tore open, a jagged, bleeding wound in the vacuum of space, screaming as the laws of physics were violently rewritten. From this dimensional rupture, the Vailari Empire emerged. They did not pilot ships of metal or alloy. Their vessels were colossal, geometric monoliths of deep, pulsating crystal. These structures did not merely reflect the starlight, they consumed it, bending the very fabric of space and time around their jagged edges. The visual distortion made them look like walking nightmares, shifting and phasing in and out of focus, deep within the subterranean heart of the Integrated Space Defense Network. Commander Ari Ayala stood paralyzed before the primary holomap. The colossal screens of Aegis Command were bathed in a sickly, crimson glow. Sirens wailed, but the sound felt distant, drowned out by the sheer impossibility of the data flooding in. Her tactical artificial intelligence systems, the most advanced analytical minds humanity had ever birthed, were violently crashing. The screens flashed a continuous stream of fatal errors. The quantum processors could not lock onto the crystalline dreadnoughts. They could not measure their mass, their energy output, or their trajectory. To the machines of Earth, the Vailari did not exist, yet they were visibly eclipsing the sun. Then, the silence fell. It was not a physical silence, but an overwhelming, oppressive weight that slammed directly into the minds of every living human being on the planet. The Supreme Commander of the Vailari did not use radio frequencies. It spoke through a forced telepathic intrusion, its voice a cold, metallic scrape against the inside of their skulls. "We possess the Chronos engine. We do not guess your actions. We remember them. We look down upon the timeline, and we see every choice you have made and every choice you will ever make." The alien voice lacked anger. It was completely devoid of emotion, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "Our algorithms have processed billions of variations of your resistance. You are mathematically solved. Your planet will exhaust its defensive capabilities and collapse into total planetary panic in exactly 4.7 hours. Your command structure will shatter. Your extinction is a finalized equation." To demonstrate the absolute truth of their words, the lead Vailari crystal flared with a blinding, ethereal light. A localized purging beam, a lance of pure chronological disruption, shot toward Earth. The automated defense grid of the planet instantly retaliated. Thousands of orbital railguns and plasma batteries fired a synchronized volley, calculated to intercept and destroy the threat. But the Vailari vessels had already shifted their positions seconds before the human artificial intelligence even calculated the firing solutions. They sidestepped the barrage with terrifying grace, positioning themselves perfectly to let the human crossfire detonate harmlessly in the void. In the very next microsecond, the purging beam swept across the outer orbital ring, instantly turning humanity's greatest defensive satellites into a fine, drifting mist of subatomic ash. The outer perimeter was completely gone. Inside, Aegis Command. The air grew thick with despair. Seasoned veterans stared blankly at their consoles, their spirits broken by the sheer futility of the situation. Ari slammed her fists onto the tactical table, her mind racing desperately to find an angle. A tactic, anything to break the impending slaughter. She initiated a sequence for a concentrated counterattack, feeding the coordinates into the master artificial intelligence. The system returned a cold, blinking response. Survival probability, 0%. She tried a defensive shell formation, 0%. She inputted a scorched earth retreat protocol, 0%. Every single tactical doctrine, every logical military maneuver she could conceive, was met with the same absolute failure. The Vailari already knew what she was going to do before she even thought of doing it. The future was a locked cage. Ori stared at the sprawling tactical feed, watching the flawless, terrifying synchronization of the alien fleet. They were too perfect. But then, in the lower quadrant of the grid, a tiny, almost imperceptible anomaly occurred. A young human fighter pilot, exhausted and trembling in his cockpit, fumbled his hands. A thermal cup of hot coffee slipped from his grip, spilling directly onto his manual thrust calibrator. The system short-circuited, and his light fighter suddenly jerked violently sideways, completely breaking formation and spinning wildly out of its designated orbital path. It was a stupid, meaningless accident. Yet, as the fighter tumbled uncontrollably toward a Vailari cruiser, Ari noticed something impossible. The crystalline shield of the alien vessel flared wildly, flickering in a momentary state of chaotic panic. The Kronos engine had anticipated every missile, every laser, and every calculated strike. But it had not predicted a clumsy human dropping a cup of coffee. It could not calculate the purely absurd. A spark ignited in the eyes of the commander. The revelation struck Commander Ari Ayala not with a thunderous roar, but with the quiet clarity of a shattering glass. She replayed the tactical feed of the tumbling fighter jet a dozen times in her mind. The spilled coffee, the shorted console, the completely random, utterly meaningless trajectory, and the alien shield, the perfect impenetrable barrier of the Vailari, flickering in confusion. The Kronos engine was a masterpiece of causality. It operated on the absolute laws of action and reaction, assessing the most optimal tactical moves a military force could make to preserve its existence. If humanity fired a missile, the engine calculated its trajectory based on physics and intent. But what happens when there is no intent? What happens when a human being acts not out of logic, but out of clumsiness, panic, or sheer absurdity? The alien machine was flawless, but it was blind to chaos. It could map the stars, but it could not comprehend the irrational, beautifully messy nature of a human soul. Above the atmosphere, the Vailari Armada began its final descent. Their countdown timer, broadcasted into the minds of every living soul, ticked away the final minutes. The crystalline dreadnoughts shifted from their passive intimidation stance into a hunting formation. It was a terrifying display of sacred geometry. Thousands of massive vessels aligned into a perfectly synchronized grid, forming a colossal, three-dimensional net of pure annihilation. They moved with a synchronization that defied gravity, every single ship locking into a designated coordinate that would mathematically guarantee the total destruction of the Earth Defense Fleet in a single, sweeping volley. The generals around Ari began to weep quietly, resigning themselves to the finalized equation of their extinction. Ari stood up straight, her eyes burning with a sudden, ferocious fire. She slammed her palm onto the master override console. With a series of rapid, forceful keystrokes, she bypassed the highest security protocols of the Integrated Space Defense Network. Alarms shrieked through the command center as she initiated an order that violated every single military doctrine written in the history of human warfare. She disabled the tactical artificial intelligence. She severed the synchronous data link connecting the human cruisers, destroyers, and fighter squadrons. She plunged the entire global defense grid into the dark, forcing every single ship to revert to analog, manual control. The communications officer stared at her, his face pale with horror. But Ari shoved him aside and grabbed the global fleet broadcasting microphone. Her voice echoed across the comms of thousands of terrified pilots and captains waiting in the void. "This is Commander Ayala. Listen to me very carefully. The enemy knows our tactics. They know our doctrines. They know every logical move we can make to save our own lives. So, we are not going to make logical moves. From this exact second forward, you are ordered to forget everything you learned in the academy." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world resting entirely on the sheer madness of her next words. "Do not fight by the book. I want you to close your eyes. Think of the most intense memory you have. The day your child was born. The worst heartbreak of your life. A song that makes your blood boil. Fight with your gut. Fight with your anger. Roll the dice. Flip a coin to decide your heading. If you want to dive, dive. If you want to hit the brakes for no reason, do it. Become unpredictable. Become chaos." For exactly 2 seconds, the comms channel was filled with a stunned, heavy silence. Then, a single, raspy voice crackled over the open frequency, belonging to an old cruiser captain. "Copy that command. Going crazy." The immaculate, defensive grid of Earth shattered. Thousands of thrusters ignited, not in unison, but in a staggered, roaring wave of absolute lunacy. Heavy cruisers, massive beasts of steel and titanium, broke their defensive shells and accelerated blindly into the dark abyss without locking onto any specific coordinates. Fighter squadrons scattered like a kicked hornet's nest. Some pilots threw their agile ships into violently tight barrel rolls, pulling extreme gravitational force just for the thrill of the movement. Others completely cut their main engines, letting their massive warships drift aimlessly like dead debris. A few gunners began firing their railguns into empty space, lighting up the void with brilliant streaks of kinetic energy aimed at absolutely nothing. There was no unified target. There was no trajectory. There was no plan. It was pure, unadulterated madness painting the stars. In the upper orbit, the Vylari fleet suddenly stopped. The terrifying, smooth descent of the crystalline monoliths jerked to a violent, jarring halt. Deep within the core of their flagship, the Kronos engine began to desperately overwork. The glowing crystals of the alien hulls dimmed and flickered frantically. Where there had once been a single, clean timeline of human defeat, there were now millions of fractured, ever-shifting, contradictory possibilities. The prediction engine tried to calculate the trajectory of a human destroyer, but the captain of that destroyer was navigating based on the frantic rhythm of his own heartbeat. It tried to predict the firing solution of a fighter wing, but the pilots were closing their eyes and pulling the trigger based on instinct alone. Every microsecond, a human pilot changed their mind, collapsing the timeline and forcing the engine to restart its calculations from zero. The Vylari sensors flooded with cascading error codes. The future was no longer a locked, predictable cage. It was a raging, boiling storm of infinite paradoxes. For the very first time, the invincible alien ships hovered perfectly still, trapped and paralyzed by the sheer mathematical terror of human chaos. The void of space, typically a silent graveyard of burning stars and drifting ice, became a canvas for the most beautifully unhinged symphony of destruction ever painted by human hands. The battle ignited not with the calculated precision of a military engagement, but with the raw, untamed fury of a barroom brawl, spanning across the entire orbital sphere. Humanity threw away the tactical playbook, and in its place, they brought the noise of their own defiant souls across the encrypted and unencrypted communication frequencies. The sterile silence of standard military protocol was violently shattered. The squadron leader of the interceptor wing, designated as the Hellhounds, a fiery veteran with nothing left to lose, slammed his gloved fist onto the atmospheric broadcast dial of his command console. He did not issue tactical flight coordinates or flanking maneuvers to his wingmen. Instead, he piped a continuous blast of late 20th century heavy metal music at maximum volume directly into the secure comm system of his entire formation. The grinding, Distorted guitars and thundering drum beats vibrated through the composite hulls of their agile fighters. Driven by the adrenaline and the deafening rhythm of the music, the pilots executed maneuvers that spat in the face of basic orbital mechanics. They threw their sleek ships into violently spinning nosedives and pulled upward so sharply that the artificial gravity dampeners screamed under the immense structural strain. They were not dodging incoming fire. They were dancing in the dark. They performed these physically agonizing acrobatic spins simply because the roaring music made them feel invincible, because they simply felt like doing it, leaving trails of bright blue thruster exhaust that resembled the chaotic, looping scribbles of a madman across the dark canvas of the cosmos. The Valari fleet, absolute slaves to their magnificent timeline predicting engine, retaliated with flawless, terrifying logic. Their crystalline weapon batteries charged simultaneously, emitting beams of hyper-concentrated plasma that cut through the vacuum of space like brilliant violet knives. The alien targeting algorithms calculated the exact, optimal evasion vector every single human pilot would theoretically take to preserve their own life. They fired precisely at those empty spaces, anticipating the logical human retreat to safety. But the human ships simply were not there. When a normal, rationally thinking pilot would dive left to avoid a lethal strike, these frenzied fighters simply cut their primary engines and drifted to a dead stop, letting the devastating plasma beams sear past their cockpit glass by a margin of mere inches. When basic survival logic dictated they should hit the emergency brakes, they slammed their accelerators to maximum overdrive, charging recklessly straight down the barrel of the alien guns and swerving away at the absolute last microsecond. The Valari weapon systems missed. They missed again and again. The dark sky was lit up with blinding flashes of alien artillery, striking absolutely nothing but empty space. A terrifying rain of mathematical perfection, rendered completely and utterly useless by human absurdity and sheer bravado. Down below the fighter screens, the heavy cruiser captains watched the wild aerial ballet on their monitors and felt the exact same infectious insanity take hold of their own command decks. These massive warships, usually slow and deliberate beasts of titanium, were never meant for agile dogfighting. But today, the old rules were dead and buried. The captain of the dreadnought Manticore, an aging man with a wild grin plastered across his face, turned to his navigation officer and yelled, "Kill the safety protocols! Punch the drive blind! We are making our own doors today!" He ordered his engineering bay to intentionally bypass the safety regulators on the experimental spatial jump drives. He did not wait for the navigation computers to spool up safe, carefully plotted destination coordinates. The navigation officer quite literally slammed his hand across the coordinate keypad, inputting a string of completely random numbers, and engaged an immediate microjump. The massive cruiser vanished in a blinding flash of bright white light and reappeared merely 3 miles away. A distance so incredibly short it threatened to tear the ship apart from the inside out. Other cruiser captains witnessed this act of mechanical heresy and immediately followed suit. Across the sprawling battlefield, dozens of massive human warships began blinking in and out of reality in rapid, randomized successions. They were jumping completely blind, appearing upside down, flying sideways, and manifesting dangerously close to each other in a terrifying display of naval roulette. The consequence of this blind, frantic jumping was a phenomenon no human physicist had ever intentionally weaponized. The sheer amount of localized spatial distortion created by engines turning on and off instantly created violent fault ripples in the very fabric of space itself. These gravitational shock waves rolled outward invisibly, like tidal waves in an unseen ocean. When these ripples slammed into the Valari dreadnoughts, the result was visually catastrophic. The flawless, crystalline armor of the alien ships, which had effortlessly absorbed nuclear detonations and kinetic railgun slugs just minutes prior, could not withstand the fundamental tearing of reality. The deep, purple crystals began to spiderweb with massive, glowing fractures. A terrible, silent shattering echoed through the visual feeds as the sharp tips of the Vailari monoliths snapped off entirely and drifted away into the void. Humanity had found the chink in the invincible armor, not through superior firepower, but through the sheer, destructive consequence of their own spatial abuse. Aboard the central Vailari flagship, the Supreme Commander experienced something its ancient, calculating mind had never processed before in its long history of conquest. It was not fear, for their species was entirely beyond such primitive biological impulses, but a profound, systemic anomaly. The battle was rapidly devolving. The algorithmic certainty of the universe was breaking down into absolute chaos, and the erratic human insects were the source of the contagion. Pushed into a mathematical corner by this aggressive and violently unpredictable logic, the Vailari intelligence determined that a physical war of attrition was no longer a viable option. If they could not predict the physical actions of the human fleet, they had to remove the variable of free will altogether. They had to forcefully cure the chaos. The Vailari commander issued a silent command, and all plasma fire ceased immediately. The massive crystalline ships dropped their glowing red offensive postures and suddenly shifted to a deep, sickly green hue. They were not charging conventional weapons of mass destruction. They were syncing their core processors to initiate a neurobiological assault, a weapon designed not to destroy the physical body, but to overwrite the mind itself. Without any warning sirens, a massive, invisible wave of psychic energy erupted from the core of the alien flagship. It did not register on any human radar system. It did not trigger the automated proximity alarms. It simply washed over the entire orbital battlefield in a fraction of a second, penetrating the reinforced titanium hulls of the Earth fleet as if they were made of thin tissue paper. This was a forced telepathic synchronization, a highly advanced digital virus designed specifically for the biological brain. It was engineered to violently tether the erratic, highly emotional human consciousness directly into the cold, calculated, and perfectly silent hive mind of the Vailari network. The heavy metal music playing over the squadron communications suddenly cut out, replaced instantly by the horrifying sound of thousands of pilots gasping for air simultaneously. Gloved hands froze stiffly on flight sticks. The wild, dancing fighter ships began to drift aimlessly off their erratic paths. The suffocating psychic wave threatened to strip away their anger, their joy, their fear, and their beautiful, protective madness. It threatened to forcibly turn every single vibrant human being in the sky into a quiet, obedient, soulless machine, perfectly calculating and entirely predictable. The beautiful chaos that had been their ultimate shield just moments ago was rapidly being silenced by the crushing, absolute order of the alien mind. The invasion was completely silent, yet it was the most deafening experience the human race had ever endured. The Vailari neural wave crashed into the consciousness of tens of thousands of military personnel simultaneously, stripping away their physical surroundings and plunging them into a shared, inescapable nightmare. Inside this forced psychic architecture, time lost all meaning. The alien intelligence did not just show the human pilots and captains the impending destruction of Earth. It forced them to live it. Every single soldier was subjected to a hyper-realistic simulation of their own brutal death, followed by the burning of their homes, the screaming of their loved ones, and the eventual reduction of their blue planet to gray ash. And then, the loop reset. The Vailari forced them to experience this planetary funeral millions of times within the span of a single heartbeat, systematically trying to crush their fighting spirit under the sheer, infinite weight of despair. The physical manifestation of this mental torture was immediate and catastrophic. across the orbital battlefield. The chaotic dance of the human armada grounded to a terrifying halt. Heavy cruisers that had been jumping wildly through space simply drifted, their massive engines powering down into a standby hum. Fighter interceptors glided aimlessly, bumping into debris as the hands of their pilots slipped limply off the flight controls. Inside the cockpits and command decks, seasoned warriors collapsed onto their navigation boards, their bodies convulsing weakly as tears streamed down their vacant faces. The guns fell silent. The beautiful, unpredictable madness that had protected them was gone. It appeared the cold, calculating prophecy of the Vylari Supreme Commander was finally fulfilling itself. The human collapse was happening right on schedule, deep within the subterranean bunker of Aegis Command. Commander Eri Ayala felt the psychic tendrils pierce her own mind. The command center dissolved around her, replaced by an infinite, sterile white void. The alien consciousness surrounded her, a cold, probing presence that felt like thousands of icy needles sliding into her brain. It analyzed her neural pathways, searching for the expected biological responses. It hunted for the bitter taste of panic, the frantic spike of terror, and the pathetic surrender of a beaten animal. It expected to find a fragile, terrified creature, ready to accept the mathematical certainty of her own doom. Instead, the Vylari probe struck a wall of solid, blinding fire. Deep beneath the superficial layers of her tactical mind, Ari harbored a reservoir of energy that the emotionless aliens could not possibly quantify. They touched upon a dark, unfathomably powerful storm composed of two entirely irrational forces: absolute, burning rage, and a terrifyingly extreme capacity for love. The aliens tried to force her to watch her planet burn, but Eri refused to look at the ashes. She focused on the faces of the people living down there, the billions of messy, flawed, beautiful souls she had sworn an oath to protect. "You think you know us," Eri whispered in the mental void, her voice echoing with the collective weight of human defiance. "You think we are just numbers in your machine." She did not try to shield her mind. She did the exact opposite, gathering every ounce of her willpower. Ari seized the invasive neural tether connecting her to the Vylari hive mind and violently pulled it completely open. If they wanted to experience human consciousness, she was going to give them all of it. She acted as a conduit, a magnifying glass for the collective psyche of her dying fleet. She gathered the most primal, chaotic emotions radiating from her paralyzed soldiers and fired them straight back up the neural link. She fed them the crushing, suffocating weight of human grief. She forced them to swallow the fierce, irrational warmth of unconditional compassion. She poured oceans of bitter, spiteful hatred directly into their pristine digital veins, mixed with the blinding, stubborn refusal to die that had kept humanity surviving for thousands of years. For a species that communicated entirely through the silent, frictionless exchange of pure logic, this sudden injection of raw, multi-dimensional emotion was lethal. The human feelings did not act as a weapon. They acted as the ultimate, unpatchable computer virus. The Vylari hive mind, a perfectly ordered network of shared consciousness, instantly fragmented. The sheer complexity of a single human heartbreak was enough to overload a crystalline processor. But Ari was feeding them billions of conflicting emotional spectrums at once. The silent killers of the cosmos began to scream. It was a psychic shockwave of pure agony radiating from the alien armada. The overwhelming flood of unfamiliar feelings caused massive, cascading system failures across the entire Vylari fleet. Their flawless neural synchronization snapped. Without the hive mind to direct them, the alien vessels were rendered completely blind and deaf. The sickly green aura of their telepathic assault abruptly shorted out, plunging the massive crystalline monoliths into total darkness. Their targeting arrays locked up. Their navigation drives stalled. The entire alien armada, the most feared technological force in the galaxy, hung completely paralyzed in the vacuum of space, choked to death by the sheer, staggering weight of a human heart. The suffocating mental grip shattered, and the human pilots gasped simultaneously, desperately pulling cold oxygen into their burning lungs. As their vision cleared from the psychic nightmare, they beheld an unprecedented, glorious sight. The terrifying Vailari Armada, once a flawlessly synchronized net of mathematical death, now drifted completely helplessly in the freezing void. Their colossal crystalline structures pulsed with a weak, erratic light, their systems entirely disabled by the devastating virus of human emotion. The human captains did not wait for official orders. They did not hesitate. The open airwaves erupted with feral, guttural roars of sheer defiance. Fire at will! Burn every last one of them down! Every remaining railgun, plasma battery, and heavy torpedo tube in the orbital defense grid unleashed absolute hell upon the paralyzed alien fleet. The kinetic titanium slugs and thermal warheads ripped effortlessly through the unshielded crystal armor. In the span of a few brutal, chaotic minutes, more than half of the invincible Vailari forces were reduced to glittering, shattered dust drifting aimlessly across the stars. The tide of the war inverted with breathtaking, violent speed. However, the apex intelligence of the Vailari Empire was not completely broken. At the very center of the decaying formation, the colossal dreadnought, known as Oblivion Prime, recognized the catastrophic failure of its interconnected hive mind. To prevent the emotional contagion from breaching its own central processing core, the Supreme Flagship aggressively severed its connection to the rest of the dying armada. It quarantined itself, locking down every external data port and neural link, instantly becoming an isolated, impenetrable digital fortress. The surrounding alien ships continued to burn and explode in brilliant flashes of light. But Oblivion Prime stabilized, a cold and solitary giant completely untouched by the psychic collapse of its brethren. Realizing that its physical superiority and biological warfare had been entirely neutralized by the chaotic monkeys of Earth, the flagship resorted to a defense mechanism utterly beyond human comprehension. The deep, purple monolith began to vibrate furiously, bleeding the colors of the visible spectrum as it aggressively ripped itself out of the present moment. It engaged a localized chronological shift, anchoring its massive physical structure exactly 3 seconds into the past. Earth interceptors swooped in like hungry wolves, firing devastating volleys directly at the broadside hull of the flagship. But the glowing plasma rounds and solid kinetic shells simply phased right through the crystal without making a sound. The human weapons struck absolutely empty space because, relative to the current timeline, Oblivion Prime simply was not there. It was a ghost, an untouchable phantom operating on a delayed echo of reality. While resting safely behind its impenetrable temporal barrier, the dark belly of Oblivion Prime began to split open, revealing a blinding, chaotic singularity of pure white energy. It was charging a temporal collapse beam. This was no ordinary weapon designed to glass crowded cities or crack tectonic plates. It was a chronological eraser. If that beam touched the atmosphere of Earth, it would send a cascading shockwave back through time, unraveling the entire evolutionary history of the planet. Humanity would not just die. They would be erased from the very fabric of existence, as if the first amphibious creatures had never crawled out of the primordial oceans. The countdown timer on the main display of the Human Defense Network reappeared, but this time, it was counting down mere minutes until total historical annihilation. Inside the subterranean bunker, the tactical displays flashed a frantic crimson as the computers tried desperately to lock onto a target that defied existence itself. Commander Ari Ayala stared at the ghostly, shifting silhouette of the alien flagship on her primary monitors. Her mind raced through the theoretical physics, the sheer impossible math of the horrifying situation. Conventional ballistics were completely useless. Directed energy weapons were completely useless. How do you kill an enemy that is hiding in history? The realization hit her with the physical force of a sledgehammer. You cannot shoot bullets into the past, but you can crash the timeline altogether. The only conceivable way to shatter a temporal shield was to introduce a spatial anomaly with so much mass and raw energy that it would cause a localized quantum paradox, violently snapping the enemy vessel back into the present moment by sheer gravitational force. She turned her gaze toward the massive, reinforced windows, overlooking the sprawling, mechanical heart of Aegis Command. The orbital station itself was one of the largest and heaviest structures ever built by human hands, a floating metallic fortress holding thousands of crew members. Without a second thought, she slammed her fist onto the global evacuation alarm. The klaxons wailed a frantic, high-pitched tune, signaling an immediate and mandatory abandonment of the massive space station. "Attention all Aegis personnel!" Ari spoke into the primary broadcasting microphone, her voice deadly calm and echoing through every corridor. "This is Commander Ayala. Initiate Protocol 0. Evacuate the station immediately. Get to the escape pods. You have exactly 2 minutes to clear the blast doors." Her bridge officers stared at her in absolute shock, their feet rooted to the floor. "Commander, what are you doing?" her executive officer pleaded, stepping forward. "I am creating a very big rock," Ari replied, turning her back to them and firmly locking her hands onto the manual navigation controls of the entire command station. "And I am going to throw it right at their clock. Get out. Now!" As the desperate crew scrambled frantically for the emergency pods, Ari began aggressively overriding the gravitational stabilizers of Aegis Command. She was preparing to tear her own colossal fortress right out of its stable orbit and pilot the massive structure straight into the temporal ghost of the alien flagship, betting her life on the heaviest roll of the dice in human history. The colossal metallic fortress groaned under the stress of its overloaded thrusters. Commander Ari Ayala stood completely alone on the abandoned command deck, her hands gripping the manual steering column. Violent vibrations rattled her teeth. Through the observation windows, the ghostly purple silhouette of Oblivion Prime loomed larger, a terrifying phantom suspended in the dark. The communications console flared to life in a burst of static, projecting the cold voice of the Vylari Supreme Commander directly into the room. "Your effort is mathematically absurd," the alien intelligence mocked, devoid of any biological concern. "You are attempting to strike a target that exists exactly 3 seconds behind your current reality, before your primitive station even touches our hull. The sheer temporal pressure separating our timelines will obliterate your vessel into subatomic dust. You are flying a dead machine into a wall of solid time." Ari did not offer a single word of response. Her hands flew across the master terminal, executing a radical command sequence conceptualized in a single, irrational heartbeat. She was perfectly aware that physical mass could not breach a chronological barrier. But she understood the one fundamental truth the aliens had fatally misunderstood. Mass was not just composed of metal and gravity. Consciousness, deep emotion, and the burning biological willpower to exist carried a tangible quantum weight of their own. She forcefully rerouted the primary power grid of the Aegis space station, dumping absolutely all of its remaining energy directly into the global quantum transmitter array. With a final strike on the launch key, Ari synchronized the colossal broadcasting dish of the station to the live biometric network down on the planet Earth. She linked her hurtling fortress to the live data of every hospital monitor, every personal smartwatch, and every digital pacemaker below. Instantly, the entire station flooded with a blinding golden light. Ari was no longer piloting a dead fortress of titanium. She had just weaponized the collective soul of her entire species. The pulsing heartbeats and the frantic brainwaves of billions of human beings channeled upward, It was a torrential hurricane of fiercely independent thoughts, burning desires to live, and raw, unfiltered chaos. This collective human spirit generated an astronomical quantum mass, an anchor of pure reality, so profoundly dense that it violently warped the established laws of physics in the surrounding vacuum. "We are not numbers in your machine," Airy whispered fiercely into the open communications channel. "We are the storm." The aegis did not shatter when it finally slammed into the temporal barrier. Fueled by the astronomical gravity of billions of human minds utterly refusing to die, the front command spire of the station hit the invisible wall of time and tore right through it, like a ragged knife slicing through fine silk. The impossible paradox of so much raw, present-tense reality aggressively forcing its way backward into the past caused the fabric of the cosmos to violently snap, with a deafening screech that echoed horribly across the psychic plane of the solar system. Oblivion Prime was aggressively yanked out of its safe chronological hiding place. The monumental gravity of human willpower dragged the alien dreadnought violently back into the present second. The flagship materialized in solid physical form, just in time for the unstoppable mass of the Aegis to plow directly through its armored chest. There was no fiery explosion. There was no concussive shockwave of expanding plasma. Instead, the violent collision triggered a catastrophic, highly localized temporal collapse. The exact moment the nose of the Aegis pierced the glowing central energy core of the alien dreadnought, time itself folded inward like a dying star. A terrifying, perfectly silent sphere of blinding white chronological distortion expanded rapidly from the point of impact, trapped helplessly inside the epicenter. The supreme flagship of the Vylari Empire began to undergo millions of years of rapid decay in the span of a single microsecond. The flawless purple crystals faded instantly to a dull gray. They cracked, withered, and turned into incredibly fine sand. The invincible dreadnought simply aged into absolute nothingness, dissolving gracefully into a quiet cloud of static space dust right before the widened eyes of the watching universe. A fraction of a breath before the expanding chronological sphere could consume the primary command deck of the Aegis. An automated survival protocol finally engaged. Commander Ari Ayala was violently ejected in a randomly launched emergency escape pod, rocketing away into the cold safety of space, tumbling wildly through the glittering debris field of a shattered timeline. The silence across the orbital battlefield was absolute. The surviving Vylari forces, those few who had witnessed the impossible destruction of their god-like flagship, suffered a total and irreversible psychological collapse. They watched a primitive species, armed with absolutely nothing but raw emotion and sheer defiance, completely break the fundamental laws of the universe simply to survive another day. The terror that gripped the alien armada was so profoundly unquantifiable that their glowing offensive hulls immediately shifted to a blinding white. Across all possible frequencies, they broadcasted a frantic signal of unconditional surrender. Down on the blue planet of Earth, humanity exhaled a collective breath. The global, tactical artificial intelligence clock, which had arrogantly predicted the total extinction of the human race in exactly 4.7 hours, froze perfectly still. The campaign timer stopped ticking at exactly 9 minutes. They did not collapse into a planetary panic. They did not break. In less than 10 minutes, humanity had forced the most terrifying, technologically superior empire in the galaxy to fall to its knees in absolute terror. They had definitively proven to the cold, calculating stars that the beautiful, entirely unpredictable chaos of the human spirit was the ultimate weapon, a wild force of nature that no algorithm could ever truly measure or conquer. Thank you so much, our wonderful listeners, for staying with us until the very end of this incredible journey. We would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please drop a comment down below and let us know your location. If you found today's story thrilling and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or use the PayPal link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Your incredibly generous support helps us pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to provide for their families and continue creating these epic adventures just for you. Until next time, stay safe and keep looking up at the stars.